Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH3501 Community Media Leadership, and this is the overview lecture for the 13th the overview video talk for the 13th lecture. It's finally sunlight coming through the windows, so it feels a bit kind of, I've got this shaft of light down my face. There we go. Let me move over. Is that better? Okay. It's disappointing to have to close the blinds. Anyway, what we want to cover this week is we're carrying on thinking about the evaluation process for community media projects and how we can use techniques based on ethnography in order to be able to identify issues and development practices that are valuable for community media projects. And this is based on the Lenny and Tashi work of communication for development and the methodology and the tips and experience that they suggest in that book. So the outline for this is to just look at some of the steps that they say about how we actually go about collecting data. So we've established in previous weeks some of the principles of collecting data, what it's based on, what the idea is. It's emergent, is that there's often a kind of, it's blended. There's no fixed way of thinking about community media activities and community development activities if they're particularly open and emergent and ad hoc. So how do you put in together a kind of, how do you evaluate and how do you record information about a project which you can use in funding applications or the development of the practices based in the project that you're working on. So this is kind of the steps, and Lenny and Tashi identify 7 interrelated steps that we can work through, and that is a kind of participatory approach, and the fundamentals of participation again are being questioned in this process. It's holistic, so it doesn't divide things up into small segments and small categories, but it looks at how the interrelationships as a whole. It's critical, so it doesn't take things at face value. It identifies how, I am going to move over here. It identifies how we separate cause from effect. What we see and what we think of as an effect, and we ascribe a cause to it. We're deductive about that. Well, actually, this kind of looks at the process in a different way, and it kind of looks at inferences from, it looks at patterns and processes of behaviour and enactment. These are social practices, and then what it says is let's figure out where that might potentially go, because there's a number of routes which might be where this might be played out in our social and group life. Then there's the being realistic, so you're working with what is there, you're not trying to imagine anything that isn't already there. It's learning based. Excuse me. And that's the sun coming through the windows, and it's accountable, but it also takes into account the complexity of I'm going to sneeze again. The complexity of a social situation as it's kind of in its dynamic interrelationships, and it asks the question, how do we best think about those social situations, especially when they are more complex. And we can look at complexity theory, we look at kind of systems theory in order to be able to make sense of these things, or we can look at if you like, we've looked at previously, a symbolic interactionist approach, which sees things as a formation of relationships and enactments. So kind of what we'll do is we'll go through each of those sections in a bit more detail. So, what do we mean by participatory processes and evaluation? What do we mean by the wider cultural, economic, and technological and organisational concerns that are raised in a holistic approach? And what I'm going to start to do with this, I've started to introduce some case studies. So it's about looking at some particular. We're not going to look at the case studies in themselves this week, but I think it's really important that we start to look at and examine some case studies. So I've identified a couple which I kind of found through doing Google searches, which are associated with international community development and communication development. And I think it might be worth us going back over some of these things in practice and kind of seeing if we can demonstrate how this would work in the field, which is, I think, where we really want to be. We want to be at the point where we have the tools and the facilities to work on a project. Maybe next year I need to refocus how this is structured so that we get this kind of practice-based evaluation. Maybe do this bit first and then bring in the intercultural communication stuff afterwards. So I'll appreciate your feedback on this to see how it's making sense. First run around the block, you never get it right first time, but what changes can we make so it's better structured for next year? So we'll look at these things in terms of the, is this sense of a kind of an emergent form of evaluation, and what's the process for collecting data? What are the kind of principles that we look to that will guide us when we're collecting data? And in the workshop sheets for this week, as you're planning the Community Media Expo, there's I've identified key points from the evaluation process that is based on this, which is, I can't off the top of me remember what it's called. It's the EAR, evaluation and let me see if I can find it. It's really annoying. I should have thought about this before, but it ties in. The workshop material ties in with what we're doing. So let's see, EAR, Ethnographic Action Research. And that's the website that we're using, one of the websites that we're using to think through how we accommodate and manage the learning process. The other one is the, where is it? Is it Community Toolbox? Yes. Well, we'll find it, but this is fairly common. If the links are in the workshop notes. Sorry, this is a disaster. Shouldn't be saying things like this. I should have this information to hand. Anyway, so we're going to look at the fundamental principles of participation as an approach for evaluation, and what the kind of guiding principles are in terms of what we keep in mind as we work through different types of evaluation, and we look out for different things. So when we go looking for evaluative information that we can use as part of our reflections, what and how do we look out for these things? What's the kind of circumstances in which we need to be aware that community media groups, community development sessions and opportunities and projects work and operate in the real world? And this ties in with the idea that it's integrated as part of an ongoing learning culture. So how can we then learn from those evaluative techniques? Right, I've embarrassed myself enough by not remembering the link to what we're supposed to be looking at, but it is in the workshop notes, so I'll find it in a bit. The lecture notes are posted up on the DMU Commons wiki. Just go to wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk, and I'll see you at the lecture. If I can press stop.